Hey, Greg, how are you? Chase? Who else is there? Welcome. We're going to proceed with the endgame stuff. Hey, Terry, welcome. Welcome, welcome. So, we are going to be using an 1800 player who showed a lot of talent and ability, but like he was lacking in the field of endgames. His overall game was like not mature, but he had a lot of talent. And what this so not being able to play the end game well, what this player tended to do was to attack more when he didn't need to attack. He just needed to learn how to play the end game. So the first two games that we'll go over the next maybe 2 days or so indicate relevant issues and how he managed to actually address these weaknesses. The first game is a fairly direct illustration of how a weakness in the end game can actually damage your results. So goes like e4. Okay, let's flip the board. So game starts e4, d6, knight f3, g6, and after bishop c4, bishop g7, d4, knight f6, and after knight c3, castles, bishop g4. All of this is quite rudimentary. h3, take on f3, queen f3, knight c6, knight e2. A much more natural move would be to play bishop e3 here, which is actually theory. And so black, I think, gets equality with knight d7, and after rook a d1, e5, black is fine. Anyway, in the game, knight e2 was played, and after knight d7, white goes c3, which was the whole idea behind moving the knight back to e2, so that you could bolster the center with pawns like this. So black goes e5, and white goes bishop e3. Not much to write home about so far. E takes d4, c takes d4, and here it's important to note that if you, after knight takes d4, black gets the initiative after knight e5, queen e2, and you've lost a very important advantage that white has in this position, which is the bishop pair. And after rook e8, it's white who has to kind of fight for equality. So that's why here c takes d4, not allowing piece exchanges. Now here, black takes advantage of the fact that these two pieces are not protected. There's a principle in the middle game called the principle of loose and hanging pieces. One thing you'll notice about strong players is that at any given time, most of their pieces are protected. They never have a scenario where their pieces are loose and hanging, like what's happened here. So this is a terrible position that white has gotten himself in. And after knight e5, he goes bishop f7, rook f7, and goes queen g3. Okay, so here, why black has to play, and he's got a very good move that he should play. Let me give you a chance and see if you can find what a black should play in this position. Okay, I'll pause the position here. Let's see in chat if you can find what the move is for black in this position. Let's see if someone can see where this is going. It's a simple move, but definitely one which would cause white real problems. Very good, Terry. Okay, I saw that I could have flipped the board, but I don't think that stops you from seeing the moves. Knight c4 is very strong because now it's white has got a lot of issues which he needs to handle, and this is not comfortable. But in the game, black played queen e8. This move is very difficult to understand what he was trying to accomplish here. And after this, I think white is slightly better. So after bishop d4, knight c6, bishop g7, this move eliminates one defender on the king side. The black king is a bit exposed. So knight c3. And here, the reason why white is better is because of his central pawns and the nature of the exposed black king. So black goes knight d4, and this looks rather artificial. Maybe much better would have been to complete development with queen e6, and after something like f4 to play rook a f8, putting pressure on f4 and the center. But I think white is still slightly better. But knight d4 is just not a good move. So white goes rook a d1, black goes queen e5, and here I want you to think a little bit and see if you can spot what is white's best move. What would be white's best move in this position? Very good, enough. f4. f4 would be white's best move. And the reason for that is very simple. The black king is exposed, so white more or less has the attack. So he shouldn't be exchanging pieces because this position is better for him. So what he did in the game, which was to take on e5, gives away the advantage. If he had played pawn f4, let's say queen c5, king h1, he's got the better game. He can play f5 in some scenarios. These weak diagonals here. He can play his knight to d5. A lot to play for. But what he does is equivalent to just giving up on the position. So black goes d takes e5. White goes f4, undermining the defense of the knight. The knight goes back to c6, f e5, rook f1, king f1, knight e5. So now, black is doing quite well, thanks to his knight on d5, which restricts the rook from getting to the 7th rank and blockades the passed pawn. In fact, if you think about what we spoke about over the past in the past day, now we're in the end game, and it's very important to know that in the end game you have two main plans. Number one, push your passed pawns. Number two, attack weaknesses to create passed pawns. I'm just going to recap this a little bit because people kind of tend to forget how useful these concepts are. So there are three main weaknesses in the endgame: a backward pawn, an advanced pawn, and an isolated pawn. Now if you look at this position, this pawn on e4 is both an asset and a liability. It's isolated, therefore it's a weakness. At the same time, it's a passed pawn, which makes it an asset. But it's definitely a target from black's point of view. And when it comes to backward pawns, you look at the G pawn and maybe the B pawn here. They are vulnerable, then they can be attacked. So black is fine in this position and should actually be, by all means, playing for a win. And in the game, after knight takes e5, white goes b3, makes sense. Otherwise, knight c4 is a bit annoying. Black goes c6. Now, when you're playing against knights, a very important concept to remember is that you must constantly be denying them advanced outpost. By playing c6, black denies the knight the square d5. King e2, king f6, king e3, king e6, knight to a4. And now check is threatened. Okay, I want you to imagine you're black here. What do you need to do? How do you... Very good. Welcome, Bet Whisper. Welcome, Snowy. B6, very good. Very important move. Again, it fits in with denying your opponent a advanced outpost. Now remember, our guy, the student here, is the guy playing black. He was about 1800. And at this point, he had not done any training on what we are speaking about regarding the endgame. He was just an 1800 who was struggling with his endgame. But this move seems very logical. White goes knight c3. So white could say he's accomplished his objective, which was to induce a weakness. By playing b6, black has created a weakness on c6 also. So rook f8, knight e2, knight d4 check now, trying to put pressure on that weakness. King e7, very important. If you play c5 here, you would have demonstrated that you didn't really get the whole point of why you played c6 in the first place. So if you play c5, knights would go back to c3 and have access to the square d5. So here king e7, knight g1, challenging the strong knight that black has. Here, black takes, makes a lot of sense, because now, after gf3, black has created a weakness on h3 and a weakness on f3. Okay, so here I think it's very important that I actually ask you what would be the most accurate way of playing. What do you need to do if you are black here? Because here, these are the problem areas for most players. This is where people start messing up a lot. So what do you do here? No, flipping the board. Flipping the board, you need to be able to look at a position and understand it doesn't matter which side you're looking at it from. Snowcat says a g5. G5 is what black played in the game, and it's not an accurate move. It actually saddles black with more responsibility than he needs to, and you understand why when we look at the position. So g5 would not be the most ideal move. Okay, I'm glad you actually just saw that as a first move, because it looks so obvious. But also when you look at the position later on, as we progress, you understand like, okay, so, okay, you know, the end game really requires a bit of flexibility in the way you look at positions and a lot of understanding. You have to be able to see the changes which have happened in the last few moves quickly and realize, okay, good, so this is no longer a priority in this position. rook f7 and king e5. No, not that, but interesting idea. If Dinafri wasn't mentioning all the moves, I would have given him the answer. I would have said he got it. But he's mentioning all the answers, so I need him to see if he can break down. The move he did mention is c5. So now it's very important that you realize that the knights are no longer in the position. So you're no longer denying advanced outpost to the knights, right? You are now facilitating for other pieces which are on the board, and that's a very important differentiation to make. And the move that black was worried about, c5, let's say f4, and rook c8. So what's going to happen is that black is able to make a passed pawn on the queen side because he's got a queen side pawn majority, which is a big asset now in this position. This rook is not going to be able to infiltrate into this position. So actually, black has got the initiative in this position. And it's an important concept to look at and understand, because you have to work with what's on the board. Here he just played g5 just because he wanted to prevent these pawns from being abreast like this. But it really doesn't matter in this position. C5 was a good move, enough. I saw it was you, but you just mentioned all the moves. That's why I just didn't mention it. You mentioned like a lot of moves. So I didn't know if you were guessing or you actually had the idea. So g5, a4, and yeah, I don't really understand this move, because if I was playing white here, I would consider playing rook g1. Now remember, you're not just making moves. You're making moves based on your understanding of what you're supposed to be doing in the endgame. We know that you are supposed to attack isolated pawns, advanced pawns, and backward pawns. Now g5 is an advanced pawn, so attacking it makes a lot of sense. Even if it can be defended in the endgame, don't worry. If they go h6, then you go h4. So now the point is that they can't take, right? Because if they take, now you play check. This helps to make this rook passive, and now you attack the h pawn, take it, and you've got two passed pawns. This would be an ideal scene. Okay. a4, I don't really get it. It's not a passed pawn. It's not. It doesn't attack a weakness. All these things, and this is the importance and the reason why we are going over these examples a lot. So black goes h6. Black could have done better here, again, just to show you that they're not thinking. Surely h4 will muddy the waters for white after g5. I'm not sure which position you are talking about. After g5, playing h4 directly, yeah, it doesn't make sense, but rook g1 makes a lot of sense. This is a good move. Attacking the isolated pawn, and after h6, h4. Like I said, the point is that after pawn takes, rook g6 check is very important. If he doesn't defend with the rook, you take the h pawn and you're going to take the h pawn again. If he defends with the rook, now the rook is very passive. And here, you just collect the h pawn and you're winning. Or at least you're better. These two passed pawns are very strong. So, but a4 definitely was a mistake. And here black goes h6. Like I said also on the previous example, here black has to think about the endgame is on its own. What are you supposed to be doing? Attacking, pushing past pawns, or attacking weaknesses? So what are the weaknesses? Isolated pawns, backward pawns, and advanced pawns. In this particular case, it's quite clear that h3 is a weakness and f3 is a weakness. So maybe a move like rook f6 followed by rook to h6 putting pressure on this pawn would have been the most relevant idea. And after like something like rook g1, rook g6, black would be holding. But the move that black played, h6, is very passive and allows this move h4. Now, of course, you can't. The move he played was rook b8. I don't even know. I don't even know what this is about. This doesn't even make sense at all. Maybe take on h4, rook h1, h5, take rook h8, and f4. And I think he's got adequate counterplay because, of course, he's got his own passed pawn. He's got a potential queenside passed pawn, and this counterbalance his passed pawns that he has. But the move he played, rook b8, is just a terrible move. And after take, again, taking the only open file that he can occupy, at the same time being in a position where he can attack these weaknesses. So king d6, b4, very important to prevent the king from approaching these pawns. c5, check, and here he wants to take on g5 with check. So c4, take with check, and king d4, rook c8, king here, blockading the only passed pawn. And after rook c7, f4, check. Notice how he uses this to keep pushing the king further away. And now f5, protecting his pawns. So now black has to play rook e7, attacking the backward pawn in this particular position. Now, I want you to see if you can spot what would be white's best move here. I ask you positions usually where I see people commonly make mistakes in. They might look innocent, but f6 is not okay, f6 would be a terrible mistake. King d4 again would be a terrible mistake. I actually underestimated the learning value in amateur games. Hey, Martin, mate, welcome. Rook e6, yeah, that would be a mistake also. Rook e6 would be a mistake, tempting one. I don't think it's losing, but I don't think it's the best move. King takes c4 would be a mistake. One important rule in the endgame is that if you have the better position, you must try not to exchange pawns. You must try to win pawns outright, but try not to exchange pawns. Okay, e5 would be a terrible mistake. I mean, you just lose the pawn. You're trying not to... The end game you play with as much greed as you can when it comes to winning material. So it's not a complicated answer, but I know, like, if you really see what I'm saying is that most of these scenarios in these end games are stuff that you can do better or handle better, but it's so easy to go wrong on them. Correct. I agree with you. James. No, no. Snowy, I agree with you. And but what it fails to do is it generates a very bad habit, which which will cost you in some positions. So it wins, it works. In fact, like I mean, you play rook e6, he doesn't have to even take, right? He could even simply play rook h7, and you'd have an active rook which would be annoying to you. And because your rook is in front of your pawn, it would be very difficult to advance your pawns. So this is the stuff I'm trying to get sort of in you. Naturally, you should be able to find the optimal move in this position in endgames. You should be thinking, how should I be thinking about it from an endgame point of view? What would be the best way? And it would save you in some positions where those options are not available. Not rook g8. And this is how you combine the different forms of knowledge, like you know, like for instance, after c4. Yes, definitely. I think white was was better. And also, like, be very careful when it comes to endgame positions and engines. Engines will probably tell you something, but not be able to carry it out in terms of, especially when it's about slightly better. In fact, I would recommend that when you're learning endgames, just keep the engine away. Just learn the concepts, the ideas. That will save you much more than a single line. Focus on the principles of the endgame. That's why a lot of people really struggle with the endgame. You cannot study the endgame with an engine. It doesn't work like that. You will be able to find random moves, but you will not be able to enrich your mind so that you can play the endgames better, which is what we are going for. So here, there's a principle which you must not trade pawns. You must try and win pawns outright. So with that principle alone, you should be able to find a move for this particular position. That's what you need to do. A5 has got nothing to do with the position. A5 actually enables exchange of pawns. Hey, Dominator, thank you for liking the stream. Rook e6, that's Snowy mentioned that move. It's not optimum. It works, but it's not the best. And we went over the idea of why it would not be the best. It's so simple. I mean, I'm really surprised you. It should be, if you made mistakes, it should be your third option. Yes, very good, Snowy. Just rook g4. Just protect the pawn. Now, there's nothing wrong with protecting the pawn. King d6. Now you take c4 because there's no way he was going to be able to protect that pawn. King d3. Rook check. King move. Rook here. And now pawn push f6. Rook d7. Rooks behind passed pawns. Rook here. Okay. What do you do? And this is where you really start appreciating. It's not complicated. It's just, again, applying principles, right? Rooks behind passed pawns. A more active rook, passive rook. A more active king, passive king. There is an idea which Mihail Marin, I think, introduces in a book called Legends that to win endgames, rook endings, you need to have at least two clear advantages over your opponent. And in this position, white has got a passed pawn, he's got a more active rook, he's got a more active king. So this should make him, or give him at least a much more, a clear advantage to win this ending. So here, yes, rook a5 check, very good. King e6, well done enough. And king d4, rook d7, king c4, here followed by e5. Again, observe how if the king, goes to e6, then f7 is clearly winning. He goes a6, rook here, threatening rook g7, rook check. Now check, rook here, attacking the weaknesses here, and the king will hide in front of the pawn. And here, black resigned. So black resigned because the advantage was quite overwhelming, and you can see the guy who's our guy is playing black, that he had a good position, but he lacked the endgame knowledge to be able to push home that advantage, right? And what I observed, like from a coach perspective, was that because he lacked that advantage, that knowledge, what used to happen in his game is he would press for an attack even if there was no attack, because he was not confident in his endgame. And this is one manifestation which can arise. You see, oh, Blah is an attacking player. He's not an attacking player. He doesn't know how to play the endgame. So he bets everything on the attack early on. So now the next game shows you something interesting. It shows you how the pressure of playing for complications can take its toll. There's a move, I think, on move 11, the move that white makes, which is terrible. Okay, so let's... So our guy in this position is playing white. After e4, he's a French player. So he goes d5, and after knight c3, he goes... Yubo, thank you so much for subscribing. You're enjoying the lessons. Thank you. Really appreciate. After knight c3, he goes bishop b4. This is the winner one variation, and quite interesting. I mean, I've been looking at the French lately, and here there is an interesting gambit after knight f3, d5, e5, c5, b4, and d4, which is worth looking at, which I thought was very interesting. But after d5, bishop b4, bishop d2, this is not a bad line by any means. And black, hey Bruce, welcome. This is not a bad line by any means, and black comes up with a dubious response. But the tendency to play for complications from the outset is not a particularly positive sign for players who want to improve rather than have fun. Our guy would later on, when he learned how to play the endgame, he later on learned to play the Tarash, which is a much more positional approach to playing against the French, and he actually got amazing results later on. Anyway, after bishop d2, black goes knight f6, and after e5, knight f d7, and queen g4. Of course, he doesn't want anything which goes to the end game. Black goes king f8, a3. This position actually should be very good for white, but from the following moves, it's clear that it's not his cup of tea, because after a3, bishop e7, instead of a3 here, actually long castling makes a lot of sense with rapid development if you want to attack. But after a3, bishop e7, f4, c5, maybe f5 is worth considering, but looks good for white after queen h3, intending to play g4 here. After c5, knight f3, knight c6, d takes c5, knight takes c5. Here, white goes b4. This is forcing the position for the sake of it. This move creates terrible weaknesses in white's position, and as white drives the knight to a good square, it's really pointless for him to have played a move like this. He had so many good moves. Like I said, long castling here looks much better. But he went b4, and this, sober mind, you wouldn't really do this. So now, black goes knight e4, and to take here allows pawn takes, and black is getting into this position very fast before white can do anything about it. So bishop d3, knight d2. Although white's dark squared bishop appears to be bad, because it's shut in by its own pawns, it actually helps to cover a lot of squares. So when you play b4, right, you've created a lot of dark square weaknesses, and that bishop, although it's a bad bishop, it covers those dark squares. So if you eliminate it as black, it means that white is now very weak on the dark squares. So now you can exploit them. As you can see, now the queen cannot be challenged on these dark squares. And after queen b4, queen b6, he goes knight b3, and this is a terrible mistake. White needed to consider maybe knight e2 with approximate equality, because it's black who gets to attack. Anyway, after knight b3, I want you to think about this position and see if you can spot what would be the best move for black. It looks innocent, but this position is probably already lost. It's already lost, I think, for white. So what you need to do is to, again, think of what's happened in the past few moves, weaknesses that have been created, and see how you can exploit it. How can you take advantage of this position? Because there's a lot. Very good bet. You've got a very sharp tactical eye. Knight takes b4. And after there are some sacrifices that you can't even refuse. If you refuse, you're just lost. So here, a takes b4, bishop takes b4, king e2, bishop takes c3, rook a b1. All these are forced. Now queen c7. Okay, if you take stock here, black has just won 2 pawns, and he's got a bishop pair, he's got a passed pawn. Everything is working for him, and there's not much to show actually for compensation from white's perspective. So he goes h4, white goes a5. Remember, you're pushing h4. h4 is not really a passed pawn. It's going to end somewhere. But a5, a4, f5, protecting g7 because this rook had come. He's still trying to attack. Is queen b4 followed by d4 also good? Okay, let's go back here. Here. Well, the problem, queen b4 is a blunder, right? Because if you go queen b4, how are you going to pile up on c3? The point behind bishop b4 is that if you play, let's say, king d2, you can simply play queen c7, and c3 would still fall. Queen b4 followed by d4. Maybe you could even, sacrifice his knight for d4, getting a pawn back. So you don't want to give him chances at all. So you want to win material outright and play for this position. f5, okay. Take. And after bishop c3, now the bishop has got a dual function. It's defending backwards, it's attacking forward. And this is a very important subject also to understand the value of a piece. This bishop is more than just a bishop. in terms of what it's doing. If you look carefully, it's protecting the promotion square for this pawn. And after knight d2, e5, e5 threatens e4. At the same time, if you take, there is bishop takes, the rook gets, or queen takes check, the rook gets off of putting pressure here. Again, the threat of e4 is a threat which you do not want to entertain. Bishop f5, now ef4, rook d3, and queen check. He loses the material and the bishop on f5. And now remember, this is our guy. His major weakness was he really didn't, or wasn't good at the endgame. And because he wasn't good at the endgame, as you could see from some of the examples that he played, you would try to force the conclusion of positions in the middle game, even if it was not applicable. He would still try to force it there because that's what he knew, and it would end him up in trouble because, you know, you'll be trying to play an endgame in a position which is not an endgame, or like a middle game in a position which should be going to the endgame. And a lot of your games, when you are trying to now go from 1500 to 1800, a lot of your games will be held by the fact that you can or cannot play the endgame. So tomorrow, what we will do is we will look at how he improved when he started playing the endgame, and how his games changed, and how he could then play a much better game of chess. I've just put a link of the leaderboard on the channel, and how you earn points for your private lessons. I would like to announce that Greyold is now eligible for his own private session as soon as he's got a slot. And you can check where you are. Yubo, I think, is closest. Yubo is on 720, almost there, and others are following. So thank you so much for joining today. Let's just find someone who we can raid. Just stay on the stream quickly for me to find someone we can rush onto and surprise. Let's say we have Hikaru Nakamura. Not that guy, he's got already too much people. Let's find someone with let's raid St. Louis Chess Club. That's actually quite a nice crew to raid. Let's see if we can. Yes, Greyold, well done. Raid STL Chess Club. Let's go for them. And I think we can raid them. Yes. Okay, guys, see you later. See you tomorrow. And enjoy more of learning and stuff. There you go.